Ladies and gentlemen, a storm is silently gathering strength across the Pacific, and its effects may soon be felt worldwide. Picture a reality where the items you rely on every day, the smartphone in your pocket, the solar panels on your roof, suddenly double in price, or worse, vanish entirely. It's no longer just a hypothetical. This world may already be closer than we think. Recent reports suggest that China, the manufacturing giant that powers the global economy, is tightening its grip on exports to the United States. And this raises an urgent question. Will China's assertive move push smaller nations to reconsider their reliance on a US-led trade system? Could this signal the end of the era in which the US economy reigned supreme over global trade? For decades, the global economy has revolved around a US-centric model. But China's bold steps toward economic independence have shifted the balance. In a shocking revelation from Bloomberg, US imports of Chinese goods fell by a staggering 20% just last year, suggesting that a deliberate decoupling is already underway. Meanwhile, trade between China and emerging markets like Brazil, India, and ASEAN countries is not just surviving, it's thriving. So, here's the question that could define the next era of global trade. Is this the tipping point where the US loses its grip on economic leadership? Let's break it down. In 2023 alone, China's trade with the BRICS nations surged by 30%, a move that indicates a strategic pivot away from the US-dominated economic order. This shift is not just a trend, it's a transformation that could radically reshape global power dynamics in ways we've never seen before. Now, let's talk about rare earth minerals. Over 90% of these critical resources, necessary for everything from semiconductors to military technology, are processed in China. In 2021, a White House report called the US's reliance on Chinese rare earths a national security risk. Yet, despite the warning, no meaningful progress has been made to mitigate this dependency. With the potential for an export halt, industries across the US that rely on Chinese components, automotive manufacturing, renewable energy, and tech, are staring down the barrel of crippling shortages. Think about this. The US produces just 12% of the world's semiconductors, while China controls over 50% of the supply chain. Could America's tech giants survive such a blow? Peter Jean, a geopolitical strategist, says it best. China's export control mechanisms are a direct challenge to the complacency of Western supply chains. The ripple effects? Catastrophic. And the clock is ticking. According to McKinsey, rebuilding a self-sufficient semiconductor industry in the US could cost upwards of $1 trillion and take over a decade. Can the US afford this monumental task? Or will it be forced to make painful compromises in its geopolitical stance? Look around your home. Almost everything you own, from your TV to your kitchen appliances, is stamped with Made in China label. What happens when these goods become either unaffordable or unavailable? Already, a survey by the Consumer Technology Association shows that 70% of electronics sold in the US come from China. And Americans are already feeling the pinch. The Wall Street Journal reports a 15% price hike in electronics due to ongoing trade tensions. Now imagine doubling that. A full halt on exports would force American consumers to rely on domestic substitutes. But can US manufacturers ramp up production fast enough to meet the demand? The cost to households could be staggering. The Peterson Institute for International Economics estimates that the average American family could face an additional $22,000 in annual expenses if tariffs and export restrictions persist. Will the public stand for it? Or will growing discontent lead to a political backlash? Meanwhile, China has been quietly strengthening its trade ties with emerging economies through initiatives like the Belt and Road. Brazil, South Africa, and Saudi Arabia are shifting towards Beijing's orbit. This strategic decoupling signals to smaller nations that they no longer have to adhere to a US-dominated economic system. Take India's recent decision to settle trade with Russia in rupees, not dollars, as one example. Countries in ASEAN are now exploring alternative payment systems to reduce their reliance on Western financial institutions. The big question is, will this open the door for these nations to form more equitable global alliances? Or will it further fracture the already divided global economy? The rise of multipolar trade blocs is already underway. The BRICS nations now account for over 31% of global GDP, surpassing the G7, according to a Financial Times report in early 2024. The US-centric economic order is beginning to fracture. Could this be the birth of a new global economic architecture? Washington has long criticized its trade deficits with China, citing both economic imbalance and national security concerns. But here's the irony. Policymakers have restricted exports that could have alleviated those very deficits. For example, the US ban on advanced semiconductor exports to China, aimed at stalling Beijing's technological progress, has, in reality, widen the trade gap. Economist Jeffrey Sachs puts it bluntly. Restricting exports while demanding balanced trade is like plugging one hole in a sinking ship, only to create another. And it gets worse. Despite a sharp decline in imports, exports of agricultural goods like soybeans and wheat have surged by 25% in 2023. This paradox only reinforces the undeniable truth. The US and China are deeply interconnected, and even the most stringent policies can't sever that bond. Some analysts argue that the US policy of containment isn't just about national security, it's about maintaining global dominance. But China's technological advancements, from AI to quantum computing, are now challenging that dominance head-on. A Carnegie Endowment report warns that US policies aimed at containing China may backfire, speeding up China's self-sufficiency and innovation. The more the US isolates China, the faster China innovates. In fact, China's breakthroughs in 7-nanometer chip manufacturing, even in the face of US sanctions, demonstrate China's incredible resilience. This raises a chilling question. Is the US trying to contain China, or is it inadvertently accelerating China's rise? Looking back at history, the US has tried similar tactics before. Remember the 1980s, when tariffs and trade restrictions were imposed on Japanese automakers to protect domestic industries? While those measures provided short-term relief, they also forced Japanese firms to innovate. Today, Toyota and Honda are global giants, capturing a significant portion of the global market. Could a similar scenario unfold with China? As historian Graham Allison warns, if history teaches us anything, it's that economic containment often produces unintended consequences. Financial sanctions, a key tool of US foreign policy, are now driving nations to seek alternatives. China's trade agreements with countries like Russia and Brazil are gaining ground, and the BRICS bloc is exploring a new reserve currency. The US dollar, which has long dominated global reserves, has seen its share fall from 71% in 1999 to 58% in 2023. Could this signal the decline of dollar dominance? If the dollar loses its central role, the US will find it harder to impose its will on the world. As economist Eswar Prasad warns, the stakes are high. A shift away from the dollar could destabilize global markets and trigger inflationary pressures. For decades, the US championed free trade and open markets. Yet today, actions like imposing tariffs and blacklisting Chinese firms reveal a different reality. As former Singaporean diplomat Kor Mani puts it, the so-called rules-based order is collapsing under its own contradictions. Emerging powers are demanding reciprocity and mutual respect, challenging the US to live up to its own ideals. The big question remains, is the world moving towards a multipolar system where no single nation dominates? And if so, what role will the US play in this new global landscape? While the challenges are immense, crises often breed opportunity. Could this be the moment for the US to reinvest in its infrastructure, boost domestic manufacturing, and prioritize innovation? The US has the resources and talent to rebuild its industrial base, but it will require a fundamental shift in mindset, from obstruction to construction. Programs like the CHIPS Act, which allocates $52 billion to boost semiconductor manufacturing, are steps in the right direction. But more comprehensive policies will be needed to ensure resilience and competitiveness in the years ahead. As we conclude, one thing is clear: this is no ordinary trade disruption. It's a moment of reckoning for the US and the global economy. Whether this crisis marks the collapse of the US-centric order or sparks a renewal of American strength will depend on the decisions made today. But one question remains: are policymakers ready to rise to the challenge, or will history repeat itself once more? Thank you for watching. If you're as intrigued by these developments as we are, don't forget to like and subscribe, and check out the next video now on your screen.